Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential, your weekly look at all things royal, brought to you by The Mail. I'm Jo Elvin, and today I'm joined by the Daily Mail's diary editor Richard Eden, back from his holidays, and his old sparring partner, Dr Tessa Dunlop. Welcome to you both. Are we going to play nice? It's been so long.
Of course, always.
Of course.
I would say actually he's pleased to see me.
Time will tell. Well, we have a lot to get through. We have news from Montecito and Windsor, plus a closer look at the Princess of Wales's growing fashion confidence. But first...
Down with the monarchy! Windows of our privacy!
Yes, that's right. South Park took aim at the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The Prince and Princess of Canada, in a new episode of the show which sees the royal pair travelling the world by private jet on a worldwide privacy tour. Richard, I think it's fair to say the programme makers pulled no punches.
I think anyone who watches South Park knows that the humour generally is very near the knuckle.
Everyone has a bullseye on their back in South Park.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and this was no exception. I personally found it very amusing. Whether Harry and Meghan did too is a different matter. But what I found so funny was that it was really spot on. Basically, it highlighted that paradox between this couple, preaching privacy and taking regular legal action over their privacy, but then constantly oversharing with information, whether it's from their Netflix series or their book. And the episode focuses on Kyle, whose life is being made a misery by Harry and Meghan moving in next door in South Park, and they won't leave him alone. And I must admit, I do feel a bit like Kyle sometimes, that, I can't get away from
They're
them.
not living next door to you.
Yeah.
But it almost feels like they are, because with the book and the TV series, you just can't escape them. So I think we all sympathise with Kyle.
At this point, I'd like to point out that we don't drag Richard to the studio with a gun to his head to discuss the royals. But hey, by the by,
I'm glad you said that, Jo, and not me, by the way.
Tessa, in the show, this is Harry is dubbed, quote-unquote, royal prince, millionaire, world traveller, victim. The Sussexes have denied the speculation, the reports that they might sue over this, which would seem a bit strange and a bit far-fetched. But do you think they're going to take these slights in good spirits? Do you think that they will be wearing it as a badge of honour? Do you think they will see the funny side?
Despite rumours, I don't actually have a hotline into Montecito and Meghan Markle's living room, beige living room. But I think that they're going to be having to bite down really hard on this, because they know they've got to behave like big boys and girls and actually see the funny side. But I think underneath there will be a bit of pain around this, because the problem is when you release a book and you release a giant Netflix series, then it's out of your control. Then the octopus grows legs and arms. And I think there will have been aspects over the last few months that have left them, and given we know they like to control things, feeling that they're existing by the seat of their pants. And this is one example of that.
You've watched it. Do you think that they'll be chortling along?
Well, anyone who's read Prince Harry's memoirs, Spare, will know that there is a sense of humour deficit. He talks about how he and Prince William gave a joint press conference when they were both doing some, I think it was helicopter training. And it was about, they were living together at this time, I think in Lincolnshire. And William kept making these jibes about what it was like sharing a flat with a house with Harry and how difficult he was. And at the time, in this recording, Harry kind of laughed along, but in the book he makes clear he was not happy about it, and William shouldn't have been making these jibes. So I imagine that, in Montecito they will be having lots to say about it, and isn't life unfair?
I don't think you like that victim comment.
You have to remember that when it comes to sibling rivalries, we all have sense of humour failures. That kind of William-Harry thing is, for Harry, deeply serious. It's about an institution, it's about his role, his raison d'etre in life. This is a cartoon which arguably is putting a spotlight on just how big this pair have become, rightly or wrongly. Now, they might not like the shape of that size, but they'll feel flattered by the airtime they're being
I don't know. I mean,
you must.
Big doesn't necessarily equal popular, as this. There's been the new US publication Newsweek has released a survey commissioned about the royal family and their popularity, and almost everybody saw their popularity drop after the release of Spare. But in particular, apparently, the Sussexes, with Harry's net approval rating down -10 points, and that's down since January. Meghan -17. What do you make of that?
I think one of the contradictions in Spare was that Harry is trying to sort of shed the skin, the prince skin, and become the person and seamlessly move into the world of Californian celebrity. But actually, he's outed himself as really a royalist. He can't kind of get away from it. He doesn't want to blow up the institution. He says himself in interviews. So there's this feeling of the contradiction at the heart of his thesis. What's it all about, Harry? And I think he doesn't even understand that. But again, we go back to history, we go back to the abdicated king. It's very, very hard to walk away from the royal family. And that's where I do have a little bit of sympathy for Harry.
So I think that he will have hoped that the publication of the book will have increased his popularity. It will have given the readers a sort of insight into him and made him more popular. So the fact that it's now plummeting really is interesting.
It's fascinating, isn't it? You mentioned Kyle, one of the main characters in South Park, and he's quoted in it as saying, you know, one of the kids says they don't care about some dumb prince and his stupid wife. Do you think that might be a bit near the knuckle for Americans now?
I don't know. It's certainly very rude. I mean, there were.
I didn't say that. Kyle did.
One of the thing about this South Park episode that's wonderful is there's so many sort of hidden details, and they put a lot of effort into it.
Look at the look of glee on Richard's face.
There's one point where Carl visits a branding expert to get some advice, and it turns out that Harry and Meghan have already been there, and they've got their details on file, and it only flashes up on screen. But if anyone could do a screenshot, it shows that it sort of lists their attributes, and when it's talking about Meghan, it says, you know, philanthropist and this type of thing, and then it adds on First Lady Botherer, which I think is the fact that sort of we know they kind of emulated Barack and Michelle Obama.
Just own it, Richard. How many times have you watched this episode of South Park?
How many have you watched it?
I've seen quite a few clips as well as the episode.
Well, Tessa, the author of the piece in Newsweek, points out that Americans appear to be turning away from the Sussexes and back to the Royals. And, you know, we've got the coronation coming up. The focus will naturally be more on UK royals. This
was always going to be, I think, the unsolvable conundrum for Harry and Meghan. You shed off a state institution like monarchy, which is timeless. Yes, it's kind of stuck in a chronological hinterland, but it is so well protected. It is so well supported. It is us to an extent. It is a huge part of our British identity, this constitutional monarchy. If you walk away from that, how do you exist? How do you finance yourself? What is your raison d'etre? In order to make waves, you constantly have to actually be in the news to generate agency. Whereas someone like Kate and William, they can pootle along and they might fall out of the news headlines, except, of course, on Palace Confidential, and nobody really bothers because they are timelessly, you know, heir to the throne, etc., etc. And I don't see any way out of that trap for Harry and Meghan, unless, for instance, she went back to acting or something. Well, looking at the wider royals, Richard, some of these figures, Camilla has a net zero rating. It just makes it sound like a bank asset, doesn't it? Charles has +11. Oh, Charles has actually, from this whole debacle, has come out of it reasonably well, I think. Well, he's been quite quiet, really, hasn't he, on the whole thing? But Catherine and William, William's at +28 and Catherine's at +32. What do you think of that?
It's great. I mean, I think, you know, they were determined not to react to Harry's memoirs and to the Netflix series, not to give a running commentary and just get on with doing what they do. You know, if that means, making the visits we've been seeing. And I think that's where you get respect. You just carry on doing what the royals have always done, and people will respect that. And the fact they don't give their views and they're prepared to look a bit silly. This week, for example, we saw the Princess of Wales trying and failing to make a pancake on Shrove Tuesday.
We've all been there.
Exactly. And so that's what we think, you know, and that I think increases affection for them rather than the sort of navel gazing.
But that's
and the
because they've got a day job. You know, they are protected by this extraordinary shell that is the institution of monarchy. And that was the ill thought through part of the Montecito Project. I don't see where it ends.
Well, let's take a look at some of your comments now. And first of all, we have Carly Press has this to say to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It baffles my mind to watch how people complicate their lives, lawsuits, books, podcasts, and all the damage for the royal family, as well as the King's coronation. Love your families and live life with peace. Well, it's possibly easier said than done in a lot of families, isn't it? But there you go. Thomas Oates had this to say about last week's episode. Have so much respect for Dickie Arbiter, and it's always great to hear him being interviewed. Hope he will be on again. Absolutely will. And a reminder, if you missed last week's show, which I do know went up a little bit later than usual, then you can head back and watch it after this one. Now, Dickie A wasn't enough of a replacement for our Dickie E, says Hetrosini Rosenberg, who wrote, "Ugh, I think I'm saying that right. Ugh, it is just not the same without Mr. Eden, watching every Thursday from Austria." Well, welcome to all our viewers from Austria. And finally, a question from Randy Woofinger, who asks, what roles do you all believe that Princess Anne and Prince Edward might have in the coronation? Will they be eased out to make Andrew's lack of a role less evident? Interesting thought. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I mean, obviously the coronation is all about King Charles. But we will see the other working members of the royal family taking prominent roles. We'll see them in the procession to Westminster Abbey, and we will see, I mean, they won't be taking part in the ceremony as such, but I think what you will see is a programme of events sort of around the country. They'll be involving all the working royals to make all different parts of the United Kingdom feel part of that coronation. And of course you'll see them on the balcony, I think, when it will be the working royals together.
Is there any merit in that vague conspiracy theory that if we sort of like minimise other siblings, it won't stand out so much that Andrew's missing?
I don't think so, really, because he's not. You know, we already saw that when the Queen was still alive, that, you know, because he's not now a working member of the royal family, you know, he and Harry won't be on the balcony and they won't be doing other things, but they'll still be there in the Abbey, no doubt.
It's simple, really. I mean, this is a state-funded occasion. So if you're part of that state, if you're part of the institution of monarchy, as Anne and Edward are, then you'll have a role. And if you're Andrew, you won't. You'll get to sit on a pew, mind you. I tell you what, there's shortage of seats. A lot of people are wanting those seats in the Abbey.
Is there any comparable situation in history that you can think of where there's been sort of like a controversial, problematic royal?
Well, very prominently in 37 and in 53. Edward, the abdicated king, was at neither, and was told in 53 by Churchill, not really wanted there, mate. You know, stay away, sunshine. You want to keep it focused on that line of succession. So we're going to see a lot of camera shots of Charles, of William, of George. That'll be where, and that's exactly what happened in 53. The cameras were always picking up little Prince Charles, who had gunge on his hair and was sitting up on a balcony between his Aunt Margaret and his granny.
And how long do we predict that the youngest members of the royal family will have to sit still?
2 hours. It's part of being posh. Sitting still is part of being posh.
That's a lesson for all you Americans there. Please do keep those comments and questions coming in. We love them. Leave them below. Email us on palace@mailplus.co.uk or let us know on social media, where we are at Mail Plus. Now, it's been a busy week for the royals, and the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, has been following them around, as ever. Everywhere they go, they can't escape her. She sent us this report from the Windsors this week.
Well, it's been a really busy and varied week on the Royal Beat, starting with the glamour of the Baftas, which I will return to later, and ending for me today, which is the reason why I'm not in the studio, with a star-studded literary reception at Clarence House to mark the 2-year anniversary of the Queen Consort's Royal Reading Room, which has been a massive success over on Instagram. In between time, though, there have been 2 really powerful engagements I've accompanied members of the royal family on. On Tuesday, I was in Slough with the Princess of Wales, who was visiting a care home, a short hop from her home at Windsor. And actually, that's one of the reasons for the visit, is to really kind of get to know and engage with the local community. And also, what made the front pages was my copy on her attempts to make a pancake. Now, unfortunately, we can't gloss over this. It was pretty disastrous. I think I joked with her and her staff, that they looked more like scrambled eggs. But what I think really was notable to me on the ground, and sometimes this doesn't come across in her engagements, is how brilliant she was and how engaged she was with the residents there. She hunkered down on a hill, she spoke to each and every one of them, was incredibly tactile. She had some really wonderful conversations with these remarkable older people. And afterwards, they and their families and their staff told me how much it meant to them to have her there, and how fabulous it was to have her take the time to speak to each and every one of them. And then on Wednesday, I was with the King as he visited the Felix Project in East London, which is a remarkable charity which distributes surplus supermarket food in the capital. It churns out up to 5,000 meals from this surplus supermarket food a day. Now, there was actually a royal first for the King there, which is a bit of a surprise given how many years he's been on the public stage, and he unveiled his first freezer, something that quite amusingly today was recorded in the official court circular, which is the record of royal engagements. And actually that freezer was paid for by the King himself, who's made a substantial donation to a £1 million fund, which is buying freezers and fridges for food banks and other similar projects around the country to enable them to also distribute fresh food and produce. So returning quickly to the Baftas, which is what I started this video diary with, it was a really fashion-forward moment for the Princess of Wales. She was wearing a repurposed Alexander McQueen gown, which had some of the embellishments taken off and a kind of long drape added to, with some striking Cornelia James black opera gloves, and in a fun nod to fashion, there was a pair of £17.99 Zara gold earrings, which I also really quite like the way she mixes high street with these amazing designer gowns. Now, I'll be honest, personally, it wasn't my favourite look. I found it a little bit too cluttered. But our fashion team at the Daily Mail absolutely loved it, and they did a big 2-page spread on it in the paper about her much more fashion-forward choices as she strides forth into her 40s. I would really love to know what our very own Jo Elvin thinks about it as an ex-fashion editor and all-round glamourpuss.
Rebecca English there. Tessa, coming to you first. It's something we've discussed on the show before, but it really does seem that Kate's fashion confidence does reflect real growth in and confidence in her role.
Yeah, I think she's looking like a queen in waiting, and she's glossy, she's glamorous. There's almost a sort of bit of Hollywood sheen to her now that there certainly wasn't before, when she was shy, demure, and she didn't really show off her assets, if I'm allowed to say that, in a world where we no longer objectify the female form. But I still get trolled for once coming on this show and saying she was lamb dressed as mutton. And I stand by that. If you look at pictures of her, and in fact, in your paper,
Tessa, you're going to have a fun afternoon on Twitter. Yeah.
But in your paper, there were pictures of her in a mulberry, for instance, in 2012, in a green dress, and then wearing her hired dress for the big Boston Earthshot event just a couple of months ago. This extraordinary figure-hugging number with her just looking incredible, a real advert for women over 40. And it really highlighted that point. There she was as lamb dressed as mutton, and now she's just spot on now. You wouldn't even use a term like that. Like she's nailed it, and she has an exquisite figure. And in a world where we go mad, people either have to be too big or too thin. I love Kate's figure. I don't think she's too thin. I just think she looks like she works out a lot. Well, good for her if she's got the time and the support to do that with 3 kids. What do you think, Richard? Did you like the black gloves, by the way, at the Baftas? Because I was a bit iffy on those.
Yeah, I was pleased to see the Princess of Wales in gloves. You know, I mean, when you think of, did part of Queen Elizabeth, you know, we think of, she wore gloves so regularly.
But black ones.
And, the black ones, they made it more interesting because she had the white
I wasn't
Alexander
massively
McQueen
keen
gown.
on the length of them, but then amongst my friends, I'm very outvoted.
Well, they're opera gloves, though, aren't they?
Yeah.
And one person who was very pleased was
That's why I don't understand. So I would never be invited to the opera.
I spoke to the crime author Peter James, and he was delighted because it was his mother, Cornelia James, who was given the commission to make gloves for the Queen, and she did it her whole career. So he's hoping that the Princess will start wearing them more often.
But I think it's also a man thing. Am I allowed to say that? That the long black gloves, You know, there's a
kind of kinky, you think?
I just think there's a thing
He
going on
said
with
it.
the gloves. He said it.
He said it.
that. Yeah, he
Yeah.
said that.
I noticed most men did seem to quite like it. Yeah.
I rest my case.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, Richard, on page 3 of today's paper, the Daily Mail, you have a story about, an exclusive story about Lady Susan Hussey. Obviously, a lot of our viewers will know that the former lady-in-waiting who had to quit Buckingham Palace after being accused of racism. So what's the latest?
This is really interesting. I think regular viewers of this programme might remember when Richard Kay was on with me, and it just came after Lady Susan had lost her role. You know, she was the Queen Elizabeth's right-hand woman, really, and then she was given an honorary role with the King and Queen Camilla. And she lost that after this exchange was put on Twitter by Ngozi Fulani, who was a domestic abuse campaigner. And it was all done with sort of shocking haste, that no one really seemed to look into things. She just lost her role, very prestigious role, very, very quickly. Anyway, the news story is that there's obviously a lot of sympathy for her among some royals, because Princess Anne asked her to undertake a duty, an engagement for her on her behalf this week. It was a funeral that she couldn't go to herself. But what was even more interesting was that it wasn't recorded in the court circular, which is, you know, the official bulletin of royal engagements. And royal sources tried to tell me, oh, this is just because, you know, we don't record them for everyone. But it's just very disingenuous. And I think they're very embarrassed. They're embarrassed at how badly Lady Susan was treated at the time. And remember, we had Prince William's spokesman putting out this statement saying, oh, you know, we don't have any time for racism or something like that. And I thought it was appalling, frankly.
And then to further muddy the waters, you have Harry in his big book interview going, oh, we love Lady Hussey. You know, she's like, me and Megs and Lady Hussey were right down with the kids. So I think there has been some really curious mixed messaging. But this was an example of, we know Anne has a great deal of empathy, whether it's hugging Harry on his way up to showing him into his late grandmother's bedroom, or whether it's with Lady Hussey. That's, I think, the person who comes out well from this is Anne, recognising that, you know, we are all fallible, we make mistakes.
I mean, I should make clear that this was a one-off. This was just one engagement that Anne asked Lady Susan to carry out for her. Personally, I'd like her to be given her role back altogether.
But
Yes,
what about
indeed.
the diversity officer? If you're going to have Lady Hussey reappointed, can we, alongside her, have a diversity officer? That was what was promised, isn't it? Or mooted, at least.
I don't agree with diversity officers.
Okay,
I don't see
Well,
why
that
you
doesn't
need
matter.
one.
It doesn't matter whether or not you agree
Yeah.
with it. They said they were going to appoint one.
Did they say that? I mean, certainly there were rumours, there were some stories that one might be appointed.
If there
so-
isn't one, then how do we address the problem, because I think it is a problem, especially going towards the coronation, that Buckingham Palace still employs, I think, less than 10% of its staff are ethnic minority, in a city where over 40% of people are from ethnic minority backgrounds. It just doesn't stack up as the head of the Commonwealth living there.
True, but the royal
operating from
family,
there.
you know, it's British institution. I think of the UK as a whole, I think it's about 15% are non-white.
Right, so under 10%,
so if it's
Richard.
10%, that's slightly
Under
less.
10%.
Maybe it should be a bit higher. I don't know, but you don't want to appoint people just because of the colour of their skin. You know, they want to have the best people who do it, and they want people who are keen to work for them. So I'm sure they're, and, you know, I know that they're addressing these issues, and they do take them very seriously.
Well, let's watch this space, I imagine. So, Richard, something else now, to someone else previously banished from duties. Your opinion on Prince Andrew. The Mail on Sunday reported at the weekend that he's worried he might lose his home now.
This is a really interesting story that King Charles wants to make savings. It seems to be it's from the Duchy of Lancaster, a grant that that the monarch uses to fund the royal family. He wants to make cuts, and he might cut basically he doesn't want to make his brother homeless. You know, there's no question of that. But Prince Andrew lives in, let's be frank, what is a palace, Royal Lodge. It's huge. And he signed a 75-year lease, so it'd be unfair to kick him out. But apparently it does need some improvements. And I think what's clear is that King Charles is saying, I won't be giving you the money for that. So, you know, either you move out. You know, lots of people in Britain, the same as all countries, tend to move into smaller properties as they get older. My parents were more than happy to move into a bungalow, so they didn't have to keep going upstairs the whole time. You know, so you know, should Andrew stay in a palace?
It's massive.
How many
I mean, the
rooms?
acres, but the acreage that goes with it, something like 98 acres. It has a swimming pool. It's a sort of wedding cake of a place. And I mean, I know that he's taken on the late Queen's corgis, but how many rooms do you need for a clutch of corgis?
Well,
That's my question.
A lot of people will be wondering why he's ever needed such a large lodging.
I think the bigger problem from this is it's all tied in with him losing the stipend he got from the Duchy of Lancashire. Now, apparently that was £250,000 per annum.
Well, that's what the Queen gave him.
That
yeah,
was no
she's happy
longer
to.
coming
Well,
his way.
nobody can live on that.
I know, it's ridiculous to even suggest it. I mean, people then mention in the same breath his naval pension. I'm like, yeah, forget that one.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Andrew, he probably spends that on tie pins. But the problem with the Andrew thing is once you start sort of picking away at the scab that is royals and their wealth, the pots of money are never ending. Because I then go down a rabbit hole saying, this Duchy of Lancashire, let's have a Google. It generates £24 million a year for the royal family. Put that alongside the Crown Estates and the sovereign grant they get from that, which is 86 million. Put that alongside the Duchy of Cornwall, which is 21 million. Then you start understanding why Harry was grumbling about not getting any money. There is so much money. And you're not even talking about the seabed that they own. But we know that was recently in the news, that all the wind farms, Charles is very kindly going to give the money from those wind farms to us, the people, the serfs, catching crumbs. But there is an issue here, and the problem with Andrew is that it draws attention to the finances of the royal family and their never-ending wealth.
Well, I think also it draws attention to the fact that, you know, we need a role for Andrew. I thought this year, you know, the King really should find a way of giving him something to do. You know, Andrew's still, he wants to play
He's a big
part.
boy, can't he figure that out?
Well, I think he wants to do stuff, but what we don't want is we don't want him to be, you know, writing his memoirs and appearing on TV shows in America. We want him to actually have some sort of constructive role, ideally, you know, for a charity.
But what is the impetus behind this story? Is if his friends were talking to the media, you know, is that with or without his consent? It wouldn't be the first time Andrew has misjudged the mood.
No, we do have, I mean, he does still have friends, and I think they want to see him being used usefully. That's the thing.
I'm so sorry that day is over. That's not possible. I mean, even before the whole grim issue with Epstein, he was Air Miles Andy. He didn't even prove a particularly effective trade envoy. I mean, apparently, he acquitted himself okay during the Falklands War, but this is a man, you know, born of privilege, extraordinarily entitled, and he needs now to wander off into the sunset. He's got corgis, he's got two lovely girls, and as we've established, he ain't ever going to be on the street. And that is as far as I'm prepared to go with worrying about Andrew.
Yeah, but the point is he's not going to do that. And if he's not allowed to have some sort of meaningful role, then he may well think, why don't I write a book? Why don't I start criticising my family like Harry's done? We've seen how little reaction there was from the royal family to Harry's book, and I don't think that would be good for the monarchy generally.
Oh no, you've really depressed me. Do you really think that that's a possibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, Joe's involved in a charity, so I'm hoping maybe you might give him a role.
In a children's charity? Moving on. What have you made of the Duke's recent public relations exercises, Tessa?
Which Duke? There's so goddamn many of them out there.
Yeah, exactly, this one. Yeah.
Duke of York.
Yeah.
Everything he touches seems to turn to dust. I mean, the picture in the bath for me was really the bottom of the basin. I couldn't get over that.
That wasn't Andrew's
yeah, to be fair, that was a couple of friends, wasn't it?
Yeah, wasn't that...
Well, it was the Maxwells.
It was the Maxwell family, it wasn't Andrew.
It was the Maxwell family. Okay, but I think nonetheless, he has not let the sort of sabre rattling around the idea of revisiting the court case. He just needs to realise when he's beat, and I get it. I get that he feels like he hasn't had his day in court, he hasn't had his truth out there. But look, mate, arguably, you've been lucky. You've had enough money to settle this and still say that you're innocent. And there's a lot of people who have fallen far fouler because they weren't born of privilege. So he just needs to realise that on the one hand, the glass is half empty, but Andrew, there's still an awful lot in your glass. So just take it and be grateful for it and hope that you get a pew or a seat on a pew on the 6th of May.
Well, I will be very much looking forward to the viewers' comments on all of this today, but it is time to say goodbye. It's montage time now, and here are some of our favourite looks from the Princess of Wales over the past few years. Before then, it's just time to say thank you to Rebecca, Tessa, Richard, and to you for watching. We will see you next week on Palace Confidential. Enjoy the montage. Bye-bye.